أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Welcome brothers and sisters once again to another Mizan live session. We have made it to article number 70, alhamdulillah, and as you can see we have a new setup to inshallah do dua so that we can make things better and better. Last week, just going over very quickly while I set stuff up here. Last week we made it to article 70. As I said, we were talking about prophethood and some of the details of prophethood before we move into today's session. So I just want to go over very quickly what we covered last week. It was regarding the infallibility of the prophets, and how we have verses in the Quran that might imply that the prophets made mistakes, maybe even the prophets sinned. Certain wording is used in the verses of the Quran sometimes that will imply that as well. For example, the Quran will use the word dhanb for the Holy Prophet. And the verse says, so that God may forgive your dhanb of the past and the dhanb that's going to come in the future. So dhanb usually is used for sin. So cases like these, maybe in the tens we have in the Quran, regarding different prophets, even our prophet, we have. So these verses, some people take them to go against the infallibility of the prophets. And so how can we resolve that? Now, as I said before, and as I explained last week, there are books written on this. For example, Allama Sayyid Ja'far Murtada al-Amili, he has a book called Bara'atu Adam, which means the innocence of Prophet Adam, where he describes in that book and brings reasoning that the Prophet Adam alayhi salam, he did not sin when he had that fruit, or some people want to call it the apple. That's not necessarily set in stone. The Quran doesn't say it was an apple. It says, don't get close to this tree. But anyway, that's irrelevant. Some people, they get so fixated on figuring out what the fruit was that they forget the lesson that they're supposed to learn from that story. Anyway. What happens is, excuse me, let me silence my phone. What happens is, there are books written on the prophets and explaining what the prophets did, why the verses of the Quran refer to what these prophets did as something that was maybe a sin or not, and explain and justify what the prophets did. All of this so that the verses of the Quran are in line with our theology. Brothers and sisters, we have to understand every person's theology will play a role in understanding verses of the Quran. I've said this again and again and again. So for example, if the Quran says God has a hand, our theology tells us God is not a material being. So we have no choice but to revisit the verse, interpret the verse in another way that goes against the surface meaning of the verse. If the verse says God's hand is on their hand, what is meant is something else other than God's physical hand. We have no choice. Our theology tells us that this is how you interpret this verse. So same thing when it comes to the prophets. We are 100% sure, and I'm saying this as mainstream Shia. Now, there might be other opinions out there, and those are perfectly fine as well. I'm just trying to speak on behalf of mainstream Shia right now. Mainstream Shia will hold that prophets, imams are infallible even when it comes to mistakes and sins and all that kind of stuff. Even if it has nothing to do with receiving revelation and delivering it to the people, even in their personal lives. Alright, so if our theology proves this to us, then what's for sure is that if a verse implies otherwise, we won't take it at face value anymore. We will interpret that verse in another way. So last week we discussed a lot of these details, but questions came up that we couldn't discuss because they each had to do with Prophet Dawood's story, Prophet Sulaiman's story, Prophet Musa's story, Prophet who was it, Prophet Adam's story, and so on and so forth. Each of these cases is different. Each of these stories and the terms used in the Quran to describe those stories, each of them requires its own dedicated explanation. You can't just give a generic explanation for all of them. All you can say, if you want to give a generic justification, is that, look, we believe that the prophets are infallible. If the Quran implies otherwise, what is meant by the verses is probably something other than the surface meaning of it. That's if you want a general answer. Okay, having said that, we moved on into the reason and the origin of infallibility. What is it? What is it that a person has that makes them infallible? This infallibility that they have, is it like now, they see things differently? What is it exactly? What has God given them that others might not have as much of? Two things Ayatollah Subhani said in article 67 of our beloved Doctrines of Shia Islam book. There he says, it's either what's working for them and in them being infallible is either the fact that they have so much cognition of God, as a result that cognition translates to love of Allah, that they could never work against His satisfaction. That equals infallibility. He says either that's the origin, or the knowledge that they have of the consequences, the dire, grave consequences of disobeying God. And that is what gets in the way of them disobeying God. Yes? One of these two or both. Of course, we believe it's both. But these two are the main reasons why someone is infallible. It's not like there's anything else going on really. It's just a matter of ma'rifah and knowledge, a special knowledge that they have, and that results in love, results in abstinence from things that will go against God's satisfaction. Okay, that was Article 67. Article 68 logically should be about whether or not infallibility goes against free will or not. So in the previous article, if we discuss what God gave these individuals that makes them infallible, then the next article has to also explain how this doesn't go against free will. Because at the end of the day, we have to understand, and I've said this a million times too, free will is one of the pillars of theology, not just Islamic theology. You'll find this in Christian theology as well, and other theologies. That if you take free will out of the equation and out of the picture, everything will crumble. There's no reason for creation as if, or at least creation of us as human beings. Free will has to be there. If free will is not there, there's no point in us being tested, becoming baligh, there being a resurrection and a day of judgment and all of that kind of stuff. All of that depends on whether or not we had free will in this life. That's why this is one of the most important things that we should always keep in mind and should always answer questions regarding this whole concept of free will. If our youth have questions on it, we have to have the answers for it, because the moment someone feels that they are forced, the moment they feel that things are scripted, then everything will go out the window. We don't want that. Okay, so if free will is so important, but God at the same time is doing something for certain individuals so they can't sin, that means free will is gone. Is that the case? The answer was no, that's not the case. Just because you know something, just because you're in love with something, and it doesn't allow you to go against that beloved, doesn't mean you've lost free will. We have hundreds, thousands, millions of cases like that. A father has power to do certain things, but because of his love for his child, he doesn't hurt his child. For example, the mother, she gets angry. I mean, in the past, I know moms would beat their children a little more maybe than today. Things have changed over time, but all in all, a mother will not just attack her child for no reason unless she's really pushed to the limits. Why? Why does she hold back as much as she can? Because of her love for her child. Because of certain knowledge that she has regarding her child. Okay, my child, still a child, 3 years old, doesn't understand, made a mistake, okay, I'll let it go. These types of things are what influence our actions, yes, without a doubt, but they don't force us into doing certain things. There's a lot to talk about regarding free will, but that's a tawheedi discussion. It goes in tawheed, and we've already discussed it in the past as well in previous articles. I don't want to get into it. Okay, so prophethood does not go against, infallibility does not go against free will. Now, we have one more thing that he wanted to make clear, and that was that just because someone's infallible as a result of, great love for God, or knowledge of the consequences of disobedience of God, doesn't necessarily mean they're a prophet now. Right? So every prophet will be infallible, but not every infallible person out there will be a prophet. Infallible meaning a person who just doesn't sin anymore. Okay? For example, the example that he gives, Lady Maryam. Lady Maryam, it says, Allah told her, or she was told that Allah has chosen her and purified her and preferred her over all the women of the worlds. Al-Alamin, Nisa al-Alamin. Okay. If that's the case, then is Lady Maryam a prophet now? She's been purified, chosen. And the same exact verb that is used for choosing prophets is used for her actually. Istafaki. Inna Allah istafaki. So Allah has done istifa of you. That same istifa is used for prophets as well. Inna Allah istafa Adam wa Nuhan wa ala Ibrahim wa ala Imran ala al-alamin. So just because the same verb is even used, does that make her a prophet now? No, she might be infallible in the sense that she's not going to disobey her Lord. She is very close to her Lord. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that she's a prophet. These two do not necessitate each other. Or excuse me, infallibility does not necessitate prophethood, although prophethood necessitates infallibility. So it's not two ways, it's only one way. Okay, so that's Article 69. Moving on to Article 70, which is our discussion today, inshallah. And that is this whole discussion of our prophet now. In conventional theology books, what you'll have is they will talk about prophethood, general prophethood. Nubuwa amma. That's what the word that they'll use. Nubuwa amma. And they'll talk about prophethood in general. Conditions for being a prophet, infallibility, miracles, all that kind of stuff. But then they also, in conventional Islamic theology books, they will also dedicate a chapter to nubuwa khassa. That means, let's call it specific prophethood. What is meant by specific? Which part of it is specific? What is meant by specific prophethood means our holy prophet's prophethood. Our prophet's prophethood has certain things that might set it apart from the prophet of other prophets. So for example, the miracle of our holy prophet. Okay, the main miracle, let's call it, of our holy prophet was what? Was the Holy Quran, yes? This book of the holy prophet, which is his miracle, I don't think we have any cases in previous prophets where their miracle was a book. Right? So that has to be discussed, because books, everyone's writing books. How does the Quran separate itself from other books? Things like that are discussed when it comes to our holy prophet, and also details of his other miracles other than the Holy Quran. Things like that will be discussed. We will get into the specifics of, those who came before him of prophets and mentioned that he's going to be coming. They get into the specifics of how we can prove the prophethood of our prophet not through the Quran but through other means, which we'll get to inshallah. So these are all things that are discussed in nubuwa khassa, and in that specific prophethood, let's say. Okay, having said that, we move into article number 70. Alhamdulillah, we've made it almost halfway through our book here. This book is 150 articles. We've gone to article number 70. Inshallah, we are able to finish the book, going as fast as we can, and trying to keep it as comprehensive as we can, as much as the book is comprehensive. Okay, in article number 70, it says that we said in nubuwa amma, general prophethood, the discussions we had on prophethood before, we discussed that there are three ways that a prophet is proven to be prophet to the rest of the people. Number one, miracle. Number two, bringing together bits and pieces of proof and evidence that this guy has to be a prophet and is truthful in their claim to be a prophet. Number three, if a previous prophet lets the people know that a prophet is coming, tells them, hey, somebody's going to come by this name, by that name, with these signs and those signs. Yeah, verification provided by the previous prophet. That's what it says here. Okay, so 3 ways, right? For the Holy Prophet, our Holy Prophet, to be also proven to be a prophet, just like previous prophets. How? Let's apply these general rules to our Holy Prophet and see how he lives, quote unquote, of course, lives up to these conditions, or these 3 different ways of proving one's prophethood and truthfulness in the claim of prophethood. The first and most important one is, of course, miracles. Those 3 methods that were mentioned, some of them are subjective. Like one of them is very subjective, bringing together evidence and proof that this person is a prophet. Okay, that is something subjective. One person will be convinced by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different pieces of proof that someone's prophet. Another person might not be convinced and will need more even to be convinced. So it's kind of subjective there, but he's gonna provide all of that. Sometimes no, it's not that. It's not even being subjective or not. Sometimes you weren't even there when something happened. So for example, a prophet comes and verifies the coming of another prophet after him, like Prophet Isa alayhi salam, letting the people know that someone's going to come after him. Well, you have to have been there when Prophet Isa alayhi salam said that, or at least be 100% sure that he said that. Okay, how? Through the Injil, maybe, if it's mentioned in the Bible. I don't like using the term Bible for Injil, because today Bible consists of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and the book that is peculiar to the Christian faith is the New Testament. Yeah, the New Testament. And so the New Testament, we all know, is made up of 4 Gospels and the books that come after it. And these Gospels are not the Word of God. This is something that everyone knows. And as a matter of fact, they take pride in. When we had a Christian theologian, he was saying this once to us. He said, look, you Muslims are proud that God sent down His Word to you. Yes? The Quran is the Word of God, right? You're proud of that. Well, that's good. But we're proud that God Himself came down, revealed Himself to us. Not that He sent a book down to us. He sent Himself down. He came down Himself. Others just observed Him and recorded things that they saw of Him, their observations of Him. Those are the 4 Gospels. And as you know, there's more Gospels out there. These 4 are the canonical Gospels, but there are more Gospels out there that are non-canonical. And so those have been put aside. Yes, the church decided on these 4 to be canonical. So now, point being, I don't say Bible because this is the Bible. Injil in the Quran is different. Injil is the actual book that Prophet Isa came with. So according to the Quran, Prophet Isa came with a book. According to the mainstream Catholic or Christian faith today, no, Prophet Isa did not come with a book. He was God Himself incarnate. He came down. He was observed by others, His disciples or whoever you want to call them, and they recorded their observations of Him. Alright, so a person who wants to know if Prophet Isa alayhi salam verified the prophethood of our Holy Prophet, they have to have either been there when he said it, or find it in his book, the Injil, which right now we don't have. Yeah, but Ayatollah Subhani is going to talk about that more in detail as we get to it. Okay, so I'll just leave that for later. So one of them was subjective. Another one, you had to have been there, or you have to be sure about it, that it happened and he said that. But there's one that's universal, and that's miracles. Miracles, if you see the miracle, it's what makes it a miracle that it is universally binding and convincing for people, right? If someone comes right now and brings my grandfather to life again, anyone who sees that will be sure that that is a miracle, that is something connected to the divine, right? And if they're sure that it's not if they're sure it's not an illusion or anything, assuming that it's not an illusion, someone actually brings my great grandfather back to life again. Well, that is a miracle. It will be universally binding. So that's the first one he takes on here, Ayatollah Subhani. What is the miracle that our Holy Prophet came with? Yes, that proved his truthfulness. And of course, as we all know, the Quran. The Quran, the eternal miracle, they call it. Why? The eternal miracle because our Holy Prophet, when he brought the Quran, It wasn't like previous prophets who did something and it worked and was convincing to people who saw it, but then the people who were not present when it happened, they missed out on it. Yeah? That's the difference between the Quran versus other miracles. Other miracles are in a specific time frame. They are bound by time. But the Quran is a book that has persisted till today, after 1400 years, and will inshallah continue to be there. So it's always accessible. This miracle is an accessible one for those who weren't even there 1400 years ago, for them to see it, for them to study it, research it, look into it. Okay, so that is, he says, the main miracle of the Holy Prophet. What makes it so miraculous? Of course, we'll get a little bit into that, although there are books written on this. Books, courses. Inshallah, Mizan will have a course on that as well soon. We're working on that with one of our instructors. But here, what he mentions, one thing he points out, Ayatollah Subhani, to show that, look, man, this is something that stands out versus all the other books that are out there. What is it? He brings 3 verses. لَإِنِ اجْتَمَعَتْ الْإِنسُ وَالْجِنُّ عَلَىٰ أَن يَأْتُوا بِمِثْلِ هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ لَا يَأْتُونَ بِمِثْلِهِ وَلَوْ كَانَ بَعْضُهُمْ لِبَعْضٍ ظَهِيرًا. That if it was for all human beings and jinn to come together to bring something like this Quran, they won't be able to, even if they all help each other out. Right? So you team up with all other human beings of the world, and you team up with all the jinn of the world, however that works. That's one super team, isn't it? That's a super team. You get together to put together a Quran like this one. You won't be able to, it says. Yeah, and we'll get into what the content of this Quran is. You know, it's not just a book. It's not your usual fairy tale, or these fictional books that they write that make it big, Harry Potter, stuff like that, right? Someone might say, well, no one can do anything like Harry Potter series. No. We're talking keeping in mind the content, eloquence, all that stuff, okay? Lack of discrepancy and so on. So that's one verse he brings. So it's talking about bringing something like the Quran. But then we go down. Next verse. قُلْ فَأْتُوا بِعَشْرِ سُوَرٍ مِثْلِهِ مُفْتَرَيَاتٍ. Bring 10 surahs and chapters like you find in the Quran that you've made up yourselves. You won't be able to. Alright, so now the challenge is getting a little easier, yet still no one can, fulfill it. It says, instead of trying to bring the whole Quran, let us see you bring 10 chapters like it. They can't. Then to make things even harder, or easier theoretically, but still it's hard practically, قُلْ فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ. So this third verse, which is somewhere else in the Quran, says, bring 1 chapter like it. You can't. And this is something, I don't know if I spoke about it on Mizan Live or it was somewhere else, about how there have been people throughout history who have tried to make and compose a chapter like one of the chapters of the Holy Quran, but they haven't been able to. And as a matter of fact, they've become the laughing stock of others. So there are stories in history. You can Google it. I don't know if you'll find any entries in Google, in Google search for people who tried to make up surahs of the Quran. But in Farsi or Arabic, you'll find it definitely. They might even have the surahs that people made in the past. Let me see if I can find it real quick. So the story goes like this. There were some people out there that tried to come up with surahs, and they said, look, we'll prove the Quran as not miraculous. How? By coming up with surahs of our own. So what they did was they asked for like a year or 2 years from people to give them a chance to go and work on it, and they came back. So what did they come with? If I can find this, it'll be cool. I don't think I can right now. Let's see if we can find it in English actually. Made up surahs. Yeah, I can't find it right now. But it's interesting. They came up with someone came and he started like reciting a surah, Al-Fil, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْفِيلُ لَهُ خُرْطُومٌ طَوِيلٌ, and I don't know, something that rhymes with that after, and then another verse after that. And people just laughed at this guy. Why? He made up a surah. What kind of surah? Al-Fil, the elephant. وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْفِيلُ, and how do you know what the elephant is? لَهُ خُرْطُومٌ طَوِيلٌ, he has a long trunk, and so on. So people laughed. Why? Because first of all, you took the Quran and Quranic surahs as a template. You just plugged in other words instead of Quranic terms. 1. 2, your content is way off, bro. Your content has nothing to do with anything. Who cares if an elephant has a long trunk? Like, come on, give us some proper content here. The Quran is full of rich content. Not just some random facts that have nothing to do with anything. If the Quran speaks about the creation of the camel, for example, it'll put its finger on those things that are really miraculous about the camel, yeah, or the fig, or whatever else we have in the Quran. All these scientific bits and pieces here and there in the Quran, these are mentioned in a certain context, and the Quran makes use of them to drive a point home. You're just giving us some facts, but instead of prose, it's in poem format. That's it. So people have taken this challenge of the Quran, but they've failed miserably in history. I really want to find the whole surah. Let me see. Give me 1 second. If I can find this, it'll be funny. Okay, yeah, I think I found it. It says, it says there were 7 people who tried to make surahs up, and each of them failed miserably. It's funny. Al-Fil, وَمَا الْفِيلُ وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا الْفِيلُ لَهُ ذَنْبٌ وَبِيلٌ وَخُرْطُومٌ طَوِيلٌ لقد أنعم الله على الحبلى, I think, أخرج منها نسمة تسعى من بين صفاق وحشى والمبذرات زرعا والحاصدات حصدا, and so on. Oh man, it's funny. Okay, so they made it up. As you can see, it's just taking the Quranic template and then just plugging in your own terms and your own words that you want. But it's the same thing. No. The Quran broke ground. The Quran innovated here, and came up with something new. It wasn't prose, it wasn't poetry, something in between, captivating, rich content. When the Quran says, "Bring something like me," you got to bring something like it in all senses, and so that didn't happen. So there's a lot of attempts that people have had. Apparently, not a lot, but some in the past. Now, brother is saying Anis Surush is one of the names of one of these people who tried their best. And apparently the True Furqan is the name of the book. I don't know. I've never looked into it, but who cares? Whatever. The fact that no one even knows about it shows that it's not something that could stand up against the miracle of the Quran. If anything, trust me, brothers and sisters, if there was anything out there that could actually stand up against the Quran, it would be widely known. The fact that it is not widely known shows that this person failed in what they were trying to do. Anyway, let's not spend more time on this. That's article number 70. Okay, the miracle of the Holy Prophet, the Quran. Who says it's a miracle? The Quran has challenged people of all times. The time of the Prophet, after the time of the Prophet, anyone, please bring something like the Quran. But no one has been able to. Article number 71 says that, look, the Quran is not just a miracle because of its eloquence. There are other aspects to its its inimitability, they call it, or its miraculousness. Let me read off of this. It says, the Quran is miraculous in several aspects. Extensive elaboration upon each of which would take us far beyond the scope of this book, so we shall confine ourselves to the following brief discussion. From the time of the descent of the Holy Quran, the first thing that struck the Arabic-speaking world and those versed in oratory and rules of eloquence was the beauty of the language, the elegance and originality of its composition, and the sublime meanings contained in the scripture. So he's going towards the eloquence of the Quran, of course, but he's trying to put things in perspective as well by explaining the time that the Quran came down in. Alright? He says, this special feature of the Quran, the eloquence and all that stuff, originality of composition, how it was an innovation really, and it was unprecedented. This special feature of the Quran was clearly evident to the Arabs of that time, as it is for those of today. And because of this, the Prophet, through continuous recitation of its verses and through repeated invitations to ponder the uniqueness of the Quran, cast the champions of oratory and the masters of eloquence into abasement and humiliation, causing them to gnaw at their fingers in bewildered rage at the majestic speech of the Quran, bitterly acknowledging its superhuman quality. That's the important part. Acknowledging that it is from the divine. This cannot be from a normal person. And then he mentions the famous story. I like this story a lot because it also has to do with one of the surahs of the Quran. I think it's either Surah Muzammil or Muddathir. One of these two talks about this individual that we're going to talk about now. The story that he shares here in the book Ayatollah Subhani. A person by the name of Walid bin Mughira. Walid bin Mughira, he's not mentioned by name in the Quran, but the Quran speaks of this individual. Walid bin Mughira, a renowned poet and a master orator among the Quraysh, declared after hearing the Prophet recite some verses, "By God, I have just heard something from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that is unlike the speech of man or the speech of jinn. It is a speech with its own unique sweetness and beauty. The branches of its words are laden with fruit. Its roots are full of blessings. It is a surpassing discourse than which no more distinguished speech exists." You can't find anything that good after the Quran. "Indeed, nothing can begin to rival its excellence." These are the things that Walid bin Mughira says. Now, Walid bin Mughira himself was a very important, significant figure during the time of the Prophet, in the beginning, in the Jahiliyyah days, and after the Prophet comes with the Quran. Walid bin Mughira, he had a big test by God, and instead of passing the test, he failed. He knew that there's something special about this book, and so he had the chance to actually confirm its miraculousness. And that would have gone a long way for the Muslims and Islam and the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But he didn't. The Quran speaks about him. And so what happens is this person is at maybe the lowest levels of Jahannam. Let me see if I can find it real quick. In the Quran, I said it's either Surah Muzammil or Muddathir. Let's take a look at Muzammil first. No, so it's Muddathir, I think. I hope I'm not wrong. Maybe it's the third surah that I'm not remembering right now. But it talks about him. There we go. ذَرْنِي وَمَنْ خَلَقْتُ وَحِيدًا. I'll just read the translation of the verses. It says, "Leave me to deal with him whom I created alone by myself, and then furnished him with extensive means. I gave him everything." Walid bin Mughira was very rich, and gave him sons to be at his side, and facilitated all matters for him. Still, he is eager that I should give him more. No, indeed, he is an obstinate opponent of our signs. Soon I will overwhelm him with hardship, of course, punishment of the hereafter. Indeed, he reflected and decided. So this Walid bin Mughira, he had that chance, as I said. He was being tested by God. The time had come for him to either confirm the miraculousness of the Quran and the truthfulness of the claim of our Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or to try to secure his own interests or whatever it was he was trying to secure by rejecting the miraculousness of the Prophet. So he had to really think about this. Throughout history, we've had people who've had these tests. For example, they say Umar ibn Sa'd, la'natullah alayhi, he spent a whole night thinking, should I fight Hussein alayhi salam or should I not? On one hand, I have to choose either Hussein and I retain the rulership of the city of Ray, which was like a beautiful city back then, or I don't fight Hussein and I lose the city of Ray. They won't give it to me. The Khalifa of the time won't give it to me. Which one? He had to think about it. So he went, he pondered, he thought, and he came up with the conclusion that I'm going to fight Al-Hussein alayhi salam. Here, Walid bin Mughira, something similar. It says, indeed he reflected. He spent some time. They say he went into his home. He said, I need some time. He goes into his home. Quraysh are waiting. The Holy Prophet is waiting to see what he's going to say. Eventually he comes out. He makes a decision. Indeed he reflected and decided. Perish he, how he decided. In other words, God is cursing him, saying, what kind of decision was that you made? What was his decision? It's interesting. Allah curses him twice in these verses. فَقُتِلَ كَيْفَ قَدَّرْ ثُمَّ قُتِلَ كَيْفَ قَدَّرْ. May he die. Look at the decision he made. Man, may he die. Look at the decision he made. Twice God curses him. ثُمَّ نَظَرْ. So he comes out, he looks around, everyone's waiting to hear him. Then he frowned and scowled, saying, then he went away disdainfully, saying, this Quran is nothing but magic handed down. In huwa illa sihrun. In hada illa sihrun yu'thar. In hada illa qawlul bashar. This Quran is nothing more than just the speech of a normal person. Walid bin Mughira knows the truth, turns away from it. What's the result of this? Sa'uslihi saqar wama adraka ma saqar. I will throw him into the saqar, which might be a part of hellfire or might be another word that's used for hellfire. But it's not going to be too cool in there. It's going to be hot. hot. Sa'uslihi saqar. You don't know how hot it is. And that's why God says, wama adraka ma saqar. You have no idea what saqar is. And then it goes on. It goes on and talks about Saqar. This is Surah Muddathir, verses 11 onwards, for those of you who want to look. It didn't mention him by name, but the tafsirs have explained this. Anyway. He says, it was not just Walid bin Mughira who extolled the outward beauty and inward profundity of the Quran. It wasn't just him. Others, they did the same thing. Other great orators, Utbah bin Rabi'ah, Tufail bin Umar, all these people, it says, that they also went against the Holy Prophet. Why? Whatever their reason was, what we know is that it wasn't justified and they will be held accountable on the Day of Judgment. That's one thing he says. Another thing that he wants to mention here, Ayatollah Subhani, to put things more into perspective about how the Quran is a miracle. He says, of course, the Arabs of the Jahiliyyah times, pre-Islamic times, because of their low level of culture, did not grasp anything but this aspect of the miraculous nature of the Quran. So we're still talking about the people of those times, okay? And how the Quran was a miracle for them. For us, the discourse will change a little bit. It will be the language and oratory aspect of it, plus other things that we need to discuss as well. But he says, look, the Arabs of the Jahiliyyah, this was enough for them. Did not grasp anything but this aspect of the miraculous nature of the Quran. But when the sun of Islam illuminated a quarter of the inhabited world, the great thinkers of the world reflected deeply upon the profound verses of the Quran and were able to benefit not only from its miraculous literary aspects, but also from the evident connection that each of its other aspects had with the sacred and the miraculous. And in every age, new dimensions of its endless verities would be discovered, a process which continues to this day. So for the people back then, it was literary. But for till today, it makes things are even more complicated if someone wants to come up with another Quran, let's say. Right? Back then, their challenge mostly was, 1400 years ago, let's come up with poetry that can counter the Quran. But today, if you're going to come up with something like the Quran, you better be able to come up with some rich content that, like 600 pages of content where you won't find too much discrepancy in, with different aspects of content that we'll get to later as well, inshallah. Okay. Article number 72. You guys are pretty quiet today, so I'm just going on. Article number 72 talks about how the Quran, when we look at different circumstances in which this Quran was revealed, okay, it'll become more apparent to us how it was a miracle, how it was so unique, one of a kind, this Quran. So far we spoke about the literary aspect, how people acknowledge that, some people embraced it, and some rejected it. Very simple. But then as time passes, people had time to think things over, and they came to conclusions that maybe people of the past might not have come to the conclusion of. Although this is stuff that applies to even people of the Prophet's time. Different things, different circumstances that if you keep in mind, it'll become even more apparent that this book is not your normal everyday book. Number 1, talks about the one who brought the Quran. Number 2, the Quran, how it was revealed over 23 years, and it wasn't just written over the course of maybe a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 year. We'll talk about each of these separately. I'm just listing them for you right now. How the Quran keeps in mind and takes into consideration the common fitrah of all people when it comes to its legal system and running a people through its legal system even. I'll explain that further as well. And then the article ends. So we have 3 things to talk about here, even that add even more to the reason to believe that the Quran is something special. Number 1, the one who brought the Quran. The one who brought the Quran, it says, was an ummi. Ummi is sometimes translated as illiterate, but they say that's not a good translation. The equivalent to use for ummi is unschooled, they say. Because when you say illiterate, that means if you put a book in front of this person, they can't read it. Okay, they don't have what it takes to read. Our Holy Prophet, at least in mainstream Shia, I can't speak on behalf of others, but in mainstream Shia, the Holy Prophet has access to Miraculousness samawat wal ard. If Prophet Ibrahim had it, our Holy Prophet will have it. We have a verse in the Quran that says, وَكَذَلِكَ نُرِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ مَلَكُوتَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, that we showed Prophet Ibrahim, and we continue to show, وَكَذَلِكَ نُرِي, not arayna. Nuri is present tense. We are showing Prophet Ibrahim. Now, what does that exactly mean? Does that mean that still till today it's happening, or throughout his life it was happening? Whatever it means, at the end of the day, it shows that at a certain time, Prophet Ibrahim had access to the unseen, had access to the other side. Malakut as-samawati wal ard, the Quran says. Let me see what translation they use here for that. Yes, it says, the dominions of the heaven and the earth. Thus did we show Ibrahim. It says show. We showed. It's like past tense. This English translation isn't very accurate here. The proper accurate translation will be, and thus we continuously are showing Prophet Ibrahim the malakut samawati wal ard, the dominions of the heavens and earth. Let me see what other. Yes, this one also, other translations, what they say: dominion, sovereignty, the kingdom of the heavens and the earth. Alright, well, whatever the translation, whatever equivalent you want to use for malakut is that which us as physical beings, we don't have access to it. There is only special VIP access for special people regarding that. So now, if Prophet Ibrahim had it, we believe our Holy Prophet had that too. A person who has access to malakut as-samawati wal ard, he is the highest of all prophets. Anything other prophets had, he has the best form of it, the highest grade and level of it. Of course he's going to be able to read a book. This is what mainstream Shia, you can say, believes in. When he has such knowledge, then he won't be able to read a book. But he's not illiterate, he is unschooled. That is the word that they'll tell you to use. At least in mainstream Shia. As I said, I don't know what other theological schools of thought hold in this regard. Alright, so if he is unschooled from the beginning of his birth till his age 40, people have seen this individual grow amongst them. We have to actually sometimes close our eyes and picture things, brothers and sisters. We're sitting here today. We never saw the Prophet. Never were there when he was growing up. That's one thing. And then we want to, sometimes visualize how things were. And then so it seems like something that's very irrelevant to us. And there's a lot of dark and gray area that we don't know about regarding the Prophet. So maybe he learned something, in one of the years of his life, and that's what caused him to be able to bring the Quran. Sometimes it's us. So let's know the people who were there, they've been there from day one of this child. They've watched him grow up. They all know. He didn't go to no school. He didn't learn how to read from like instructors or tutors or whatever. As a matter of fact, back then, they say literacy was it wasn't your normal everyday commodity. It was something that, only the elite had access to, being literate. Sure, poetry was recited and all that stuff, but the actual literacy, that was something reserved for the elite, and the nobles of a community. And so the Prophet is an ummi individual. Ummi means like the way he was born from his mother, unschooled. Okay, this person all of a sudden brings a book like this. Come on, are you kidding me? A person who throughout his 40 years that they've been with him, they don't see him really reciting even poetry, too much maybe. I'm not getting close to any of that. All of a sudden comes with verses like these, one after another. Look at what the Quran says. I love this verse of the Quran. It says, Surah Ankabut, verse 108 says, مَا كُنْتَ تَتْلُو مِنْ قَبْلِهِ مِنْ كِتَابٍ وَلَا تَخُطُّهُ بِيَمِينِكَ إِذَا لَارْتَابَ الْمُبْطِلُونَ. I love this verse. It says, O Prophet, you know why I love it, by the way? I love it because of the wording. The wording says something here, okay? That it's not that the Prophet is illiterate. It's something else. It says, and thou was not a reader. I don't like this translation. Let me pull this up. The translation in this sometimes gets too classical. I don't even understand what it's saying. It says, you did not used to recite any scripture before the Quran, nor did you write it with your right hand. Right hand, back then people would use their right hand, meaning you didn't write anything with your hand either. For then the doubters, or the ones who were trying to prove you false, would have been skeptical. They would have had reason and proof and arguments to prove that you are a false prophet. Look at the wording here. You weren't reciting scripture before it. It doesn't say you were illiterate. It says you were not reciting. No one ever saw you pick up a book and read it. Number one. Nor did you write anything. No one ever saw you writing. Literacy is literacy in the sense of being able to write and stuff. That's something that people had, the elites. You growing up, no one ever saw you writing anything, right? There was a reason why Allah kept you like that, O Prophet. إِذَنْ لَارْتَابَ الْمُبْطِلُونَ. If that was the case, that you had ever, this is so important, if you had ever picked up a book or written something with your hand, people would have reason to believe that yes, this Quran is his own work. So throughout your life, you never experienced any of that. Not experiencing any of that is one thing, and to actually be illiterate is another thing. Why can we not believe that the Holy Prophet was literate? Miraculously, God gave him that knowledge, but he never used it. The verse doesn't call him illiterate. The only thing you can find in the Quran that some might use to prove that the Prophet was illiterate is the word ummi. Ummi, and Nabi al-ummi. The Ummi Prophet, he's referred to as an Ummi Prophet in the Quran. Some take that to mean as illiterate. As I said, what others will tell you is that Ummi comes from means mother. Ummi means someone who still is as if they still have to do with the time they were born from their mother. In other words, unschooled. There's a lot of discussion here whether the Prophet was illiterate or not. There might even be books on it. I don't want to get into that. Point being here, brothers and sisters, at the end of the day, whether he's illiterate, whether he knows how to read or write but just has never done that before, whatever it is, people have seen this individual grow amongst themselves for the past 40 years. They would never expect him to come up with something like this, but then here he is with that Quran. Okay, so number one. Alright, we have two more to go and then I'm going to slowly wrap up. Alright, so let's just go through the other two. Number two reason that puts things into perspective more for us to believe that it was a miracle is the fact that the Quran was composed and put together, let's call it, over the span of 23 years. It took 23 years for this Quran to be written. You see, sometimes you're at your prime of your career or whatever it is that you're good at. And so let's say you're a writer, you're an author. You take that pen and you start spending time writing. You don't take 5 years off and then come back again. No, you're in the flow of things. You're warmed up. You're going strong. People, that's how, usually, at least my understanding, is that's how they write books. They write books like that. If they want to write a story, a fictional book or whatever, it kind of flows. They sit down, they spend a big chunk of time just writing and drafting and all that until the book comes together. Here we have the Holy Prophet, 23 years is writing this book, quote unquote. If he had made it up himself, you would find a lot of inconsistencies. And there would be no cohesiveness in the Quran. Yet we find that no, although it was written over 23 years, not just like a normal book that's written over the span of 1 or 2 years, how normal authors do, yet you find nothing in it that is problematic in that sense of, discrepancies that cannot be resolved and reconciled and stuff like that. Okay, so now, I don't know if I should read off of this or not. Oh, this part is important as well. What else do we find in the Quran? So as it was written, let me read off of this real quick and then we'll end, inshallah, after we do the third part, okay? So we're on part 2 right now. The second thing that puts things into perspective. The fact that in different verses, the Quran explains excuse me, I'm just trying to find. The Quran was revealed in recitation to the Holy Prophet over the course of 23 years under various conditions, peace and war, while journeying or residing at home, etc. The nature of such an oral discourse normally imposes at least 2 or more different styles or modes upon the speaker. Even authors who compose their works under unvarying, stable conditions and who attempt to maintain thematic consistency and stylistic harmony are often unable to avoid discrepancies and disharmony in their works. Such problems are even more likely to befall one who delivers a verbal discourse gradually and under extremely variegated conditions and circumstances. He says all of that. So that is time. So time-wise, it's hard to keep consistency, number one. Number two is, he adds more here. He says, I like this part more. It would be appropriate here to recall that the Quran contains discourses on themes as diverse as theology, history, religious law and legislation, ethics, the natural world, and other matters. So it's not just a matter of time. It's more than that. It's time. This time span is long. 1. 2, the topics. There's such diversity in the topics. All of these things, you are putting them all into like a melting pot and you're coming up with the Quran. Don't stop it just yet. Alright, so all of this is happening. There's got to be inconsistencies and discrepancies, but you don't find it. The Quran acknowledges this. The Quran says, وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. If the Quran had come from anyone other than Allah, you would find a lot of discrepancy in it, given all these different topics, and all this time span, and all the different, what is it called here? The modes that the Prophet, and the conditions, different conditions that the Prophet was under. Yet you'll find that consistency and cohesiveness once again. All right. So all of that, that's the second one. That's the second reason to believe that it's a miracle in addition to its literary component. So number one, the Prophet being unschooled. Number two, the fact that there's consistency over 23 years with all those different topics. Number three, finally, is how the Holy Prophet, the Quran, it has a stable, uniform legal system for people of all walks of life, for all times, and this is all based on the common nature that all of us have as people, that Allah has given us, which is referred to in Islamic theology as the fitrah. I'll read off of this real quickly and then we'll end. It says, the Quran recognizes the capacity of human nature, fitrah. Okay, well, that's what it's called. Here they call it human nature. For farsightedness, and on that basis establishes laws. So God's laws are based on the fitrah. What's he trying to get at here? It's a specific time of uniformity that we have in the Quran when it comes to the legal system of the Quran. Given this fundamental capacity for insight, all aspects of the spiritual and material life of man are encompassed by the Quran. Universally applicable principles, ones which will never fade or become outmoded. So the Quran will have certain guidelines for life. Those will apply to a person 1400 years ago, they will still apply to those people today. Right? They are principles, very general principles. Now, we do have to understand, there is this concept of ijtihad and how dynamic Islamic legal system can be sometimes as well. But once again, that's not going against the principles of the Quran. That is applying them when conditions have changed, circumstances have changed. So Islam will have a principle for a certain set of conditions and circumstances, and it will have another principle applicable to other circumstances. As time passes, situation changes, which calls for another rule or legal precept. Now that, once again, is a general rule that Allah has put in the Quran. And what is it based on? It's based on us being human beings and the fitrah that we have. That's all it is really. That's what he's saying here. Now, these can be discussed further and further and further as well. He's keeping it very concise, and that's how I'm going to keep it. But I will acknowledge that there is a lot more to discuss regarding some of these aspects. Yes, but those are for more detailed sessions, and they are beyond the scope of what we're trying to cover. So alhamdulillah, we made it to article 73. We have a couple more articles to go before we move on into 2 or 3 more articles before we move on into the characteristics and features of our Holy Prophet. We still have one more session before we get to that as well, inshallah. So we're almost halfway done with specific nubuwwah khassa, and we will continue next week with that, and then we'll end it and we'll talk about the Holy Prophet. Now, I just have to say one thing. So we are done with the June sessions for Mizan Live. Inshallah, look out for the flyer for July, inshallah, because July will have its own poster and the timings might change and so on. So just make sure that you check that out for our sessions. Inshallah, we'll have a session next week and every week, inshallah ta'ala. I thank you all once again. Keep us in your du'as. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.